and welcome back to another episode of the Dylbozer's Den. You know, every so often you get hit with a suggestion from a friend and you've already got a pre-existing kind of idea of what something's going to sound like when you hear it. And I sure did on the album we're going to be discussing today, which is the 2024 release from Denver Transplants Oryx and their album Primordial Sky. My co-host on the Riff Worship podcast, Austin Paulson, he suggested this record to both Justin Swindle and I. And I will say, I am pretty doomed out. Between our Thou deep dive and a few releases throughout the year, like my ears are kind of faint on it. And that's not to give a slight to that music. I will come back to it. It's going to take a bit of a break. So when I saw that this album was 4 songs and 40 minutes long, I started to go, I just can't. I don't know if my ears are going to be able to take it. I don't know if my brain's going to be able to take it right now. And I was wrong. This is a great record. The runtime, the song length does not take anything away from the fact that you have great songs written on this album. You have great riffs throughout the record. You have great playing. You have great production. It's a really fun album. It's a bit of an experience. It's a journey. Everything feels like it means something on here. You've got great soundscapes on here. You've got great textures. It's a fun record. I am adult enough to admit I was wrong. So we're going to talk about the record. It's the band's second release through Translation Loss Records. Came out on October 18th of 2024. One of those albums, again, kind of sneaks in last minute and you miss it and so on and so forth, right? But I guess the first thing to get into is the artwork on this, right? Let's look at the thing that draws us in. This artwork looks like a lot of different things. At first, from a distance, it kind of just looks like a 3D depiction. Kind of makes me think of like some the band Floor, their artwork from time to time. But it also made me think of a lot of us millennials or people of our age group, probably played the original Super Smash Brothers. And there is a Legend of Zelda stage on there. And it makes me think of that. However, it's a lot more intellectually based than that. The artwork is done by an artist named John Harris, who is a renowned British sci-fi artist and illustrator. He's done work with NASA, of all things. It does resemble a lot of like sci-fi novels, some of the cover artwork from novels from like the 70s or early 80s. And I know my high school and my middle school and elementary school still had a bunch of those on the shelves. So I remember looking at a lot of those. That's the first thing I noticed with this record. Tremendous piece of artwork. It sucks you in, and the album sounds like the artwork. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of this. Founded in New Mexico in 2012, sometime over the last decade or so, the band relocated to Denver, Colorado, which is where they're located today. Throughout this time, the band has mainly been helmed by drummer Abigail Davis and guitarist Thomas Davis, who also are a couple. And they're joined on this record for the first time by Joshua Kaufman on bass. The album was mixed and mastered by Wes Johnson, who has worked with other bands such as Suffocator, Deathblow, and Harvester of Ash. The album was recorded at Archive Recordings in Salt Lake City, Utah in around January of 2024. So at present time, the album's about a year old in scope, although it's only been out a handful of months. The production is really great on this album. By the way, it sounds very natural, it sounds very organic, it's loud. There's a lot of great textures throughout, some synth work all throughout the album. It sounds more like soundscapes as opposed to just standard keyboard work. I still have the mindset that most keyboards are going to kind of sound like Rainbow in the Dark when it comes to heavy bands, although I know better. But a great mix of that. The synth stuff, the keyboard stuff, it doesn't get in the way of the meat and potatoes of this album. It helps to move the structure of the songs along. It helps to move the journey along because that's what this album feels like and sounds like. Thomas handled all the keyboard work on the album as well. So he's kind of wearing 3 hats. He's pulling the Geddy Lee, right? Guitars, vocals, synths, etc. The album's 4 tracks. It's 2 roughly 12 or so minute long tracks and 2 roughly 7-minute tracks for about a 40-minute runtime. With some death doom acts or doom or stoner doom or whatever you want to call it, the riff kind of takes a backseat and is primarily used as a dynamic change or is used as another texture. You're kind of wanting the weight of the band to hit in and affect everything. Bands such as Thou, Pallbearer, Warning, etc. Those, I could keep going, all have different elements to them that they focus on the riff. Like a lot of the Thou tracks that we've talked about earlier this year in Thou albums, those are riff-based songs. They have the elements of Doom where it is this huge, open, kind of spacious pattern, but they still use a riff. Pallbearer does the same thing. Then you look at bands like Primitive Man, who do have their own riffs, but are there just for sonic pummeling most of the time, which is an aspect of that I like as well. This band doesn't do it. Oryx doesn't do it. The riff is still there. They still use the main concept with a lot of heavy bands that one riff can technically write a song, right? You know, it's not everything has to be Rust in Peace where you've got 36 riffs going on or 10 riffs or whatever. But let's dig into this a little bit. Albums loaded with riffs. I'm just going to name a few rather than kind of dig into the solo side of it, because not only is Thomas, singing, doing the synth work on this, writing the riffs, he's also a pretty damn good guitarist in the soloing realm. So I'm just going to kind of blend a lot of these together to kind of emphasize this as well. Primordial Sky, the riff at 1 minute and 48 seconds in, kind of evokes a feeling or a vibe of bands like Warning, but moves with like the lumbering swing of I Hate God or Sleep. The band knows how to write a song. Obviously, Abigail and Thomas have worked together for a long time, so their ability to play back and forth with each other really helps out in the songwriting realm. And this track really only has like 1 or 2 riffs, and everything else is kind of based off of those 1 or 2 riffs, but you still get this great vibe, this great feel. There are solos all over this track. And one thing that I want to hit on with the solos is that they all have a very similar sound. Each solo isn't played the same way, but the solo guitar sound is very reverb rich. It's got a little bit of delay on it. It almost uplifts out of the songs. It's so pronounced and so different from the rest of the tonality of the record. But you've got 3 solos on this song alone. None of them feel like they're being forced in the track. None of them feel like they're there just to play a solo. It all feels like it fits the journey. It does feel like you're reading a sci-fi novel. So let's get on to what is probably my favorite track on the record, which is Myopic. This track alone encompasses so many styles and influences in it. I mean, there's black metal elements all over. There's more death metal elements in this track than I hear on any of the other tracks. Really, when it comes to death tunes, sometimes the death metal side is strictly vocal influence because it's a lot of guttural sound, screaming, shrieking, that sort of thing. And Thomas does a great job all over this record. He's got a really good range for this form of music. He's got a great styling to it. It's not just low guttural stuff. As I mentioned, there's a mid-range kind of screaming thing going on, and there's some high-pitched shrieks going on to add to that. But Myopic, black metal elements, stoner metal elements, you call it. The riff at 2 minutes and 4 seconds in almost sounds like early High on Fire kind of riff, Art of Self-Defense, or Surrounded by Thieves, that era of the band. Then we go to Ephemeral, 41 seconds in, you got a Pallbearer-esque dirge that's kicking in. You've got a riff at 1 minute and 57 seconds in that's got these great hard rock, classic rock bends all over the top of it. Again, they kind of jump out of the mix a little bit, so it adds a little bit more texture to it. You have another great riff at 3 minutes and 57 seconds in. And then you've almost got a Caius or desert rock, like California stoner rock riff at around the 6 minute and 15 second mark of this. And now we're to the final track, 4 tracks. That's it. Look Upon the Earth. And this is definitely the magnum opus of the record. It's the final track. It's a trek. The whole track feels like you're going a completely separate journey. It feels like an RPG. If you're a fan of like any sort of fantasy novel or sci-fi novel or any sort of, movies along it feels like that. This is the track that the artwork comes to mind when I listen to it. But you've got some great riffs on here, 1 minute and 7 seconds in, which is this very mournful feeling riff and vibe and even in tempo. A riff emphasized in dissonance at 3 minutes and 4 seconds in. You've got this riff that starts out with a bit of a bass break, which we'll come back to at 5 minutes and 31 seconds. That sounds like Black Sabbath Master Reality era, kind of has that 6/4, 3/4 kind of like grooving rhythm to it. It's also got these very Forest of Equilibrium era cathedral kind of bends and swells on top of it. Early earache kind of doom. Then you've got a solo at the end of this that is probably my favorite solo on the whole record. It starts at 8 minutes and 58 seconds in and ends at about 10 minutes and 10 minutes and 5 seconds in. It has every element of Thomas's solo playing in it from all over the record. And it also evokes some like note choices that would make me think of like Brent Hines from the Crack the Sky era or Blood Mountain era of Mastodon. Talk about the bass a little bit. First listen to the album, the bass cuts through all over. It's a fundamental. It locks in really well with the drums, locks in with the guitars really well. This band moves like one giant force. It doesn't feel like the bass and drums are an afterthought. It all feels like everything has the tie-in to work out. The bass has a great fuzzy low end grunt to it. I'm sure it's a tube amplifier of sorts. I know Thomas has his own amp company that he owns. The bass sound on this album is great. It cuts through at certain points on the album. So here's just a couple. On Primordial Sky, there's a melodic section at about 5 minutes and 25 seconds in that does kind of have a worm meets pallbearer sound. Yeah, it's a hard one to kind of come up with, but when I heard it, I heard those guitar tones and I heard the kind of lumbering doom of pallbearer, and the bass is really carrying it through that with all of that going on. And then we get the Look Upon the Earth, which has the bass break, 5 minutes and 31 seconds, leads into that Sabbath riff I discussed. And then we have, prior to the big solo at the end of the song, you have a kind of bass and guitar back and forth at 8 minutes and 28 seconds in. That just this like melodic interplay of sorts that sets up the solo, and the fuzz cuts through. It sounds really fucking cool. Then let's get on to Abigail's drumming. First thing I noticed about the drums on this record is they're snappy as shit. They're cutting through, they're snappy. It almost sounds like the kicks might be triggered, but I know they're not. And not on this type of recording. They're cutting through. It doesn't just sound like a felt beater hitting, a detuned drum head or something. This sounds really fucking good. And that snappy kind of sound makes me think of Tad records like Inhaler or even the Melvins' Del Crover. And a really good representation of this kind of snappy drum sound is in Ephemeral at around 5 minutes and 30 seconds in. Just a great representation of that Del Crover kind of snap and pop that he's got that Abigail definitely has. When it comes to doom metal or doom metal adjacent bands, there's so much space that has to be taken up. A lot of these bands play it really slow kind of BPMs, moving and lurching, and it has a lot to do with timing. You look back at like Sleep's Dope Smoker, there's so much about that track and song and album that has to do with timing that your drummer has to be locked in. Abigail does a fantastic job. You look at the track, Look Upon the Earth, the entire track is being carried by the drums. There's nothing changing. The tempos are all right. The entire track could be carried because there's so much going on in that track and there's so much space that the only way that that track moves the way it does is those drums. And I do believe that Abigail is the MVP on this record to me. Tremendous, tremendous job. All things aside, this was a fantastic record. I begrudgingly admitted I was wrong And I got a really great record at the tail end of last year that got to add to my list of albums that I really enjoyed. So much so that I bought it as soon as I listened to it. It's here over my left with this fantastic piece of art. Great album, great journey. Listen to your friends when they suggest music. At least give it one listen, regardless if you like it or not. You never know what you might find. Oryx, Primordial Sky, great fucking record.